And if the story of the universal flood was not a punishment for sin, but a military cleanup operation, there exists disturbing evidence suggesting that the mythical Atlantis and Genesis narrate exactly the same end. What lies at the bottom of the ocean might not be just stone ruins, bawar, but a prison designed for eternal beings. The official history has deliberately hidden the connection between the Sumerian gods and the fallen angels of the Bible. Everything begins with an advanced civilization that dominated the earth long before human history was written. Ancient texts do not speak of primitive men, but of a golden age governed by beings of superior intelligence. To understand the truth, we must look towards ancient Sumeria and its records about some strange antediluvian kings. The clay tablets describe the Apkallu, 7 primordial sages who emerged from the waters to educate us. These beings were represented as hybrids, half fish and half man, possessors of an incomprehensible wisdom. Curiously, the location of their civilization coincides with the descriptions that Plato made millennia later about Atlantis. But the Sumerians were not the only ones to record the presence of these masters who arrived from the depths of the sea. The Bible in chapter 6 of Genesis introduces an element that completely changes the narrative of the flood. The scriptures mention the Nephilim, giants born from the forbidden union between the sons of God and human women. The word Nephilim does not simply mean giants, but those who caused to fall or the fallen ones who corrupted the earth. Just like the Sumerian Apkallu, these beings brought with them technical knowledge that humanity was not supposed to possess. The Book of Enoch details how they taught metallurgy, astronomy, and sorcery, accelerating human progress in an artificial way. This transfer of forbidden technology created a hybrid civilization, powerful and completely disconnected from the natural order. The Greeks, for their part, kept the memory of these same events in their mythology about the Battle of the Titans. Atlas, the leader of these titans, not only shares the etymology with Atlantis, but also his fatal destiny under the waters. The Greek Titanomachy describes a war between the gods of Olympus and a race of giants prior to current humanity. It is fascinating to note that all these cultures describe the same race, gigantic, almost divine, but morally corrupt beings. Their dominion over the earth was absolute, building cyclopean cities whose underwater ruins we are today just beginning to detect. The corruption of their DNA and their forbidden knowledge was what provoked the divine sentence that we know as the flood. The water was not sent just to drown people, but to physically erase the technology and genetics of the Nephilim. However, the text suggests that the physical destruction of their bodies was not the end of their existence in this plane. This is where one of the most terrifying and least understood mysteries of the ancient biblical scriptures comes into play. The Book of Job and the Psalms mention a sea creature of cosmic proportions known as the Great Leviathan, often imagined as a simple whale. The original descriptions paint a monster of chaos and deep darkness. There is a theological theory that suggests that the Leviathan is not just an animal, but the manifestation of that ancient submerged evil. Could this creature be the guardian assigned to watch over the ruins of the civilization that was sunk by divine wrath? Some scholars propose that the spirits of the hybrids who died in the flood could not ascend and remain trapped here. The legend of Atlantis says that the city was swallowed by the sea in a single day and a night of absolute misfortune. If we correlate this with the Bible, the oceanic abyss becomes the prison of the angels who abandoned their dignity. The deep ocean remains the most unexplored place on our planet, a dark void that covers most of the world. Modern sonars have detected anomalies on the seabed that defy conventional geological explanation. Pyramidal structures and geometric formations appear in the scans of areas where there was supposedly never solid ground. Conventional science dismisses these findings, but the ancient texts warned us that the truth was underwater. The concept of Tartarus in Greek mythology is the place where the Titans were chained after losing their war against Zeus. The Bible uses a very similar word, Tartaros, in the New Testament to describe the prison of the fallen angels. This confirms that Greeks and Hebrews were talking about exactly the same historical event, only changing the names. Atlantis was not a utopian paradise, but the world capital of these hybrid beings who enslaved primitive humanity. Their technology allowed genetic manipulation, creating chimeras and monsters that myths would later remember with terror. The flood had to be so violent to ensure that none of these biological aberrations survived on the surface. But the water has memory, and the depths of the ocean preserve secrets that we may not be prepared to discover. The Leviathan is described as a tortuous serpent that moves in the depths, a symbol of the chaos prior to creation. Some mystics believe that this entity is asleep, waiting for the moment of the final judgment to emerge again. The persistence of stories about submerged cities in all the cultures of the world cannot be a simple coincidence. From India to the Americas, everyone remembers the gods who came from the water and who ended up being destroyed by it. The figure of Oannes in Babylon was identical to the Apkallu, a being who came out of the sea to instruct the king in occult sciences. If these beings were the inhabitants of Atlantis, then their legacy remains alive in the secret societies that guard their knowledge. The monumental architecture that we cannot replicate today is the silent proof that giants once walked among us. But the most disturbing detail is found in the biblical prophecy about the end of times and the return of chaos. The Apocalypse mentions that in the last days the sea will deliver its dead, a phrase that could be more than literal. Does this mean that the prison of the abyss will open and that which was submerged with Atlantis will return to the surface? If the Leviathan is the jailer or the last survivor of that race, its awakening would mark the end of our current era. The modern obsession with searching for Atlantis ignores the danger of finding something that was deliberately hidden by God. Perhaps the city was not lost by accident, but was buried under kilometers of water to protect us from its influence. The pressure at the bottom of the oceanic trenches is capable of crushing any submarine, protecting what lies down there. But the low-frequency sounds, captured by hydrophones, suggest that there is something immensely large moving in the darkness. Science calls it the bloop or biological anomalies, but the descriptions coincide with the movement of a colossal beast. Let us remember that the Sumerian texts said that their gods could live both underwater and on solid ground without difficulty. If the genetics of the Nephilim included characteristics of the amphibious Apkallu, the flood would not have drowned them all. They could have simply returned to their original element, waiting in the depths for humanity to forget its fear. The connection between UFOs and unidentified submersible objects could be the modern key to this ancient enigma. Many sightings of strange lights do not come from outer space, but emerge from or submerge into our oceans. And if the Atlantean civilization never completely disappeared, but simply retreated to a base unreachable to us, this would explain why the governments of the world have stopped exploring the seabed to focus obsessively on space. They know that what is below is much more dangerous and ancient than anything we can find on Mars or the Moon. The Pact of Silence on underwater archaeological findings suggests that there is a truth that could collapse our society. The reality of the Nephilim and their capital city, Atlantis, would rewrite the origin of man and the veracity of the scriptures. We are walking on a thin crust of earth, ignoring that beneath us sleep the ancient owners of the world. In Leviathan, described in Job 41, it is a creature before which no one is so bold that they dare to wake it without consequences. Its skin is impenetrable and its heart is hard as a millstone, a description that evokes an almost artificial nature. Could the Leviathan be a biological machine, a final weapon created by the Atlanteans before their imminent destruction? The possibilities are terrifying when we connect the dots between forbidden archaeology and apocalyptic prophecies. History is a cycle, and that which occurred in the days of Noah is prophesied to repeat itself in a not-too-distant future. The reappearance of advanced technology and genetic manipulation are the signs that we are rebuilding ancient Atlantis, but this time there will be no ark to save us if we awaken the forces that were chained in the darkness of the abyss. The next time you look at the sea, remember that its calm surface is just a mask that hides a history of war and blood. What sleeps in the depths has waited patiently for millennia and perhaps has already begun to wake from its sleep. It is vital to understand that the sons of God mentioned in Genesis were not ethereal beings, but physical and tangible entities. Their ability to father children with human women demonstrates a biological compatibility that current science cannot explain. These hybrid descendants, the heroes of antiquity and men of renown, ruled the first city-states with an iron fist. Universal mythology is filled with demigods who performed impossible feats, a distant echo of this lost race. When Plato describes the structure of concentric rings of Atlantis, he is describing an advanced defense technology. That city was not just a commercial port, but the command center of an elite that believed itself superior to the Creator himself. The punishment of the flood was, therefore, a surgical intervention to excise a genetic cancer that threatened humanity. But what happens with the knowledge that these beings left behind before being erased from the face of the earth? There exist ancient maps like that of Piri Reis that show the coast of Antarctica without ice, suggesting a pre-Diluvian knowledge. This indicates that there was a civilization capable of mapping the entire world long before we had capable ships. That global civilization is undoubtedly Atlantis, the empire of the Nephilim that extended across all continents. The pyramids scattered across the globe are not tombs, but remains of an energy network that this race used for its purposes. The similarity between Mayan, Egyptian, and Sumerian constructions proves that there was a single source of master architecture. However, the biblical account insists that their wickedness was great on the earth and that every intent of their heart was evil. We must not romanticize Atlantis as a lost paradise, but remember it as a technological and spiritual dystopia. The Leviathan, lurking in the abyss, is the living reminder that such evil was not annihilated, but only contained. Ancient rabbinic texts describe the Leviathan as a being that if freed would burn the world with the breath of its mouth. This description coincides disturbingly with weapons of mass destruction or technologies that escape our current understanding. Perhaps the Leviathan is not a biological creature, but the last vestige of the war machinery of the Atlanteans. If that technology were to be reactivated, the consequences for our modern civilization would be devastating and instantaneous. The Bible warns that as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the coming of the Son of Man, a cyclical prophecy. This implies that we will see again the appearance of the Nephilim, genetic corruption, and the revelation of hidden mysteries. The melting of the poles and the exploration of the sea trenches are bringing us dangerously close to discovering this prison. Every expedition to the bottom of the sea is a potential risk of breaking the seals that have kept these entities locked away. Human arrogance leads us to seek answers where we should only have respect for the borders imposed by God. The laments that sailors have heard for centuries on the high seas might not be the wind, but the echoes of Tartarus. It is possible that the sirens of mythology are a distorted memory of the genetic experiments of the Atlanteans. The biological engineering of that era had no ethical limits, mixing species to create perfect servants and soldiers. The flood submerged those laboratories of horror, but fossil evidence of strange creatures continues to appear today. The truth about our past is much stranger and more terrifying than any fiction that Hollywood could have invented. We are not the first advanced civilization on Earth, and if we are not careful, we could end up exactly the same as them. The Ica stones and the Acambaro figures show men living with dinosaurs or dragons in a remote past. Were these dragons the beasts controlled by the Nephilim, or perhaps the same creatures described as the Leviathan? The official narrative tells us that evolution is linear, but the evidence points to cycles of ascent and total destruction. Atlantis is the missing link that connects prehistory with biblical history, uniting science and religion in a single story. The ancestral fear that we feel towards the deep ocean is a survival instinct engraved in our genetic code. We know, deep in our being, that the water was the instrument of judgment and that it still hides the executioner, Sumerians. When writing about the Apkallu, we're trying to warn us that civilization is a poisoned gift from the gods. Prometheus, who delivered fire to men in the Greek myth, is another version of these rebellious fallen angels. The price of that knowledge was eternal condemnation, both for the teachers and for the humanity that accepted the gift. Today we are recovering that forbidden knowledge through artificial intelligence and genetic editing. We are reopening the doors that the flood closed, inviting the same forces to take control once again. The story of Atlantis is not a fairy tale, it is a warning written in stone and water for future generations. The Leviathan waits in the darkness, patient and immortal, knowing that the time of man is short and his memory fragile. When the oceans begin to boil and the waves overcome the mountains, we will know that the time of grace has ended. The definitive proof of the existence of these beings is not in a museum, but hidden under tons of hydrostatic pressure. Only those who are willing to accept the supernatural reality of the world will be able to understand what is coming. The next time you hear about an inexplicable underwater discovery, you will know that it is one more piece of the puzzle. Atlantis, the Nephilim, the Titans, and the Apkallu are different names for the same truth that refuses to die. The veil between our world and the abyss is thin, and there are ancient hands clawing from the other side to break it. Keep your eyes open and your mind awake, because the history that you thought you knew is just a shadow of reality. Subscribe now if you want to be among the few who know the hidden truth before history repeats itself.